Hey guys, and welcome back. This is James, and today we're going to be making another bag, but starting off with a brand new technique. Now, before talking about the bag, I wanted to talk about the technique I'm using here. This is a very new test for me, dyeing the leather using a spray. So this is very cheap from Amazon, basic spray, and it's not necessarily made for this. It's made for paints, but I basically assumed it would work the same. And it more or less did, except it wasn't perfect. I mean, there are some issues with this, and I am definitely going to experiment with this in the future to see if I can get some more interesting patterns in terms of dyeing. You know that I've always loved dyeing things differently, and this was a test for me. So obviously I've skipped through that part quite quickly, but overall it's an interesting experience, and I would definitely try it again. And if you're looking to dye things using a air spray, I'm not sure exactly what the technical term for that would be, then I would definitely recommend it. It's relatively cheap off Amazon and you can get into it quite fast. What I would say though is don't make the mistake that I was doing of using alcohol-based spray, or sorry, dye, because I think, to be honest, quite a lot of the alcohol was evaporating before the dye hit the surface, which meant there was very little of the dye actually sticking at one point, and I felt like I was going over the same bits over and over and over, trying to get something looking okay-ish, when had I been using a water-based dye, maybe this would have been easier, faster, I don't know. It's something I'll look into. If you guys have any experience dyeing things that way, do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback on this, and if you guys want to see more, do let me know as well, because that will encourage me to go out and buy a new spray, because obviously I broke mine. So yes, do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback on that particular technique. I have decided to buy more leather that have been pre-dyed to make things easier, because I spend a long time dyeing my leather, and it's been an interesting ride, and I now want to try something a bit more, let's say, hands-free, or just easier basically, instead of having to dye everything. You can see me now making the straps, and as always I've gone for an overly complicated strap system, but I'm very happy with the result actually. So I am going to be testing out a new way of attaching the strap to the bag, and you can see I have one central buckle, which is going to be where all the stress is going to be placed on the bag. And there are several reasons why I want to try this out. The first one was because attaching the straps straight onto the bag that I was doing previously meant that there was a lot of stress transferred from the straps when they were moving, when the bag was being taken on and off, from the straps to the bag itself. And the leather, although it's holding up well, very well indeed, I have noticed that the leather is being pulled a lot more than I would like, and I'm looking for ways of minimizing this by having one central point which is much more flexible, hence the round buckle, or the round piece of metal there in the center, where the weight of any movement you might make on the buckle, on the strap, will be distributed more evenly across the area in the middle of the bag, at the back of the bag, where the straps will meet. Now, there are several issues with doing this though that I have found, which you'll see I managed to find interesting solutions to. One of the things that I was worried about is making a handle to the bag that was incorporated into the attachment for the buckle. Now, I'm sure there are many ways of doing this. I went one route, which we'll discover in a minute, and the route I took meant that there were a lot of layers of leather potentially at the same area, and I'm using relatively thick leather, so that was one thing that I was worried about, and I think the system I found is indeed more than adequate to distribute the weight properly. So we'll see that in a minute. Now I would like to talk about something that I should have probably mentioned at the beginning of the video. Why am I making this bag? So this is a present for my mother, actually, for her birthday, 60th birthday, and I was very slow in making it indeed. It took me 3 months to make. I put it down and didn't come back to it for a long time, and I should have finished ages ago. So actually, while you're watching this video, there is a lapse of 3 months going by, so she's delighted with the result now. The colour you can see on the screen was originally a bit too light for my taste and definitely for her taste, but the colour it is now is much better, and you'll see what happens later. So that's the first thing. The second thing I need to talk about is the leather I'm using. This is veg tan leather, which is the leather I use pretty much all the time. I just love this stuff. I find that this gives me the best results so far. Obviously, there are many different types of leathers out there, and the more I practice this, the more I learn about leathers. I'm a huge shoe fan. It might sound weird, but I love looking at different shoes, especially leather boots, and even there I'm discovering more things that are helping me understand how leather works and understand how I could be using different leathers for different projects. However, I do find that the most enjoyable to work with for what I'm doing still remains good old veg tan leather. This is what I'm using here. I believe it's a mix between the usual types of leather which I will use, which is 2.5 or 2.4 millimeters thick leather and 1.4 millimeter thick leather. And this is the result of the buckle. So as you can see, the handle is incorporated into the whole system, and the buckle is attached to the handle, and the handle in turn will be attached to the back of the bag. And this will redistribute all the weight and all the pressure and all the tension that's being put into the bag every time you pick it up or move around the straps. And hopefully this will make for a much longer lasting result in the end. I'm really looking forward to see how this particular piece ages long term. There are many things I could be improving upon the design here. I do think you can incorporate the buckle into the handle instead of having it separate, but that's the design I went with, and I definitely will be trying to improve on that design in my future bags because I really like the idea of this. There are unfortunately no templates and nothing that I can help you and guide you with if you want to replicate this or make something similar. Unfortunately, I basically drew a rough plan. I assumed what sizes I would like the bag to be and tried to assume what sizes each individual piece of the bag would be. And I'll have to be very honest with you, the original intent is absolutely not what I wanted in the end. It's close enough, it really is, it's close enough, and I love the result, but it's not what I had envisioned, which is why if you guys are out there trying to make things, I would seriously definitely say start off with templates if you can for wallets and card holders and things like that, but if you're feeling up to the challenge, do go ahead and plan yourself a build that you will design from scratch and that you will cut the pieces to from scratch. It will give you a much more in-depth understanding of what you're actually doing, of how the pieces come together, and of how you can improve upon your design process in the future. Every single piece of my bag right now, of this bag, has flaws. Every single piece is not what I intended it to be originally. Every single piece has been basically has incorporated into it errors that I had to work around and improve, and I absolutely love this bag despite these flaws because it has, you know, apart from the fact of being a nice comfy bag for my mother, it has been a bag that's taught me a lot about making leather, the dyeing process, the cutting, the design process, the cutting of pieces process, the stitching. Everything has challenged me to rethink how I wanted this bag to be in the end. So I'm close enough to what I was wanting originally. It is different, but I'm happy and satisfied with it. At this point, you've seen me make the pocket, which will go outside. And interesting fact, I've put the zip on the left-hand side of the pocket, or the right-hand side of the pocket if you're looking at the bag, left-hand side if you've got the bag on your shoulders, and it's because my mother tends to sling the bag off her right shoulder and sling it across the left side of her body to be able to access it. So by having the zip on the side, and not on traditionally on top in the middle, on the side of the front pocket, she can actually, without taking the bag off, just sling it over onto her left shoulder and access the zip with her right hand. And it makes it very practical, and I will try and demonstrate that later in the video for you guys. So the pocket is going to be on the outside, and the flap above the pocket that will close the bag, I used a similar style that I used on a previous bag, and you'll see very soon what that is, and I'm very happy with the result. Right now you're watching me prepare the bottom of the bag. So this is a very thick piece 2.5mm leather. It has got splotches on it from the dyeing process. I was maybe a bit too hasty in the dyeing process, or just, made mistakes. You can see on the right hand side there are some mistakes from dyeing, which I will partially try to cover up over the next few steps. And definitely when choosing which pieces to cut on the actual piece of leather after the dye, I was very careful to try and place the splotches and the errors wherever they could be hidden, so inside flaps or in areas that wouldn't matter, so at the bottom of the bag, for example. I am now attaching the buckles for the straps, and I do want to note one thing here, is that I will not be cutting the holes or puncturing or pushing through the holes for the actual straps to go into the buckles until the very last step, and I actually don't show it on this video simply because I wanted to measure it out on my mother's back to see what sizes would be comfortable for her before I could actually start cutting the final sizes for the straps. So unfortunately you will not see the bag 100% finished, but you'll see it pretty much 99% finished simply because of that. I am using a saddle stitch as always. This is the only type of stitching I know how to do, to be honest, and I'm fairly confident that I've got the hang of it by now. I have to start learning to use an awl properly and going through the motions properly. I'm still not doing it the right way. I'm just doing it in terms of the technique using. I'm talking here. I'm not talking about the results. I'm talking about the technique I use to actually puncture the holes through the leather and then sew with the basically the saddle stitching technique. I am very confident that I've got the final results I want now. I'm quite good with that, happy enough with that. I've still got lots to improve upon, but I'm quite happy with the results of that. However, the actual technique, the movements I'm doing when I'm sewing, the gestures I'm doing, I know can be improved for efficiency, for consistency, and for solidity, which are three words that I find very interesting, not just because they sound good, but because they are essential to making a good bag. We have to remember all throughout this process that a bag is one of those things that eventually will be just chucked around, and however nice and good the bag is originally, the owner eventually will scuff it up, will use it to its full extent, or at least that's the whole point of this. So it has to be aesthetic, yes, but it has to be sturdy, and that is an essential quality that I look at when designing the bags, when trying to see which piece goes where, and when trying to assemble these pieces. I am very careful, and I keep in mind that idea of sturdiness and trying to combine the sturdiness with the design. Yeah, you can see the stitching is not great here. This is going to be, what you're seeing here is the back of the bag, and these are the back of the straps. So the stitching not being perfect is not the worst thing in the world. As long as the stitching on front is straight, I'm happy enough. But this is one of the details I'm saying where I still have a lot to learn, a lot to improve, and hopefully I have gotten myself a cheap awl to try and start learning the motion, and we'll see if that helps. At this point I start cutting the sides of the bag, and as usual, instead of trying to split the side downwards and sewing it inwards as I did for my very first bag on my channel, I decided to just instead sew it in a way that the bag sides would be angled inwards. And to make sure it was nice and sturdy, obviously I doubled up the sides here. I'm using the 1.4mm leather on the sides to make sure that even though the back and front of the bag are really nice and sturdy, the sides do have some play, can breathe around, can move around with the bag. At this point though, I figure out that my measurements are not absolutely perfect. Yeah, what did I say? Measurements. Along the way, and this is mainly why I don't have any plans or designs, along the way a lot of things turn out to be slightly different to what I'd imagine them to be, and my measurements often are one of those things. At this point, the sides of the bag are just simply not big enough, they're not tall enough. So I use this as an excuse to come and reinforce the lower part of the side of the bag with some very thick 2.5mm leather, so the same thickness as the rest of the bag. So even though the sides are going to be relatively flexible and will breathe and will move, the bottom of these will still have a really nice strong structure to them and will be well attached to the bottom of the bag, and will mean that the bottom of the bag is still going to be very strong and sturdy. This is not what I had originally intended, but this does work. I do like the result. I'm very happy with the way it turned out, even though, once again, this was a surprise to me. This is what it looks like when it's attached. You can clearly see the difference between two leathers. One is 1.4mm, the other one is 2.5mm, and very happy with the stitching here, I have to say, at least on that side, because the other side is pretty bland. I'm always looking for interesting shapes, and this is part of a KitchenAid machine, and I just found that the curvature seemed to be very pleasing, and at the same time quite adequately shaped for this piece of the bag, and I decided to hell with it. This is going to be the bottom of my bag. Now at this point I wasn't really thinking tremendously straight, because I decided that this was a very nice curvature and I liked it very much, but I hadn't thought about this as being part of the structural design of the bag. I hadn't really thought it through, in the sense that having a nice round bottom to the bag, as much as many of us might like a nice round bottom, this is not necessarily the most convenient size and shape for a bag, simply because when you place a bag down on the floor, you like your bag to stay standing straight. Now what happens when you have a nice round curvature? The bag would simply flop over. So it's a design element, let's say. It's a design element. Yeah. So skipping through quite a few phases here, you can see the bag is pretty much to form. You can see the sides are on, you can see the gorgeous curvature of the bottom of the bag, you can see the pocket is on, and you can now understand what I mean by having the zip on the left side of the pocket. And this is when I start thinking, good God, this bag is huge. This is most definitely not a day-to-day bag, although that is what she's using it for, and she loves it for it. This is most definitely, for me at least, a weekend bag. One of those bags that you can stuff with stuff. Lots of clothes and all your stuff for all the things you might want to bring on a long weekend, and it's perfect for that, or at least that's what I would assume it would be for me at least. But ultimately it is, for my mother, the perfect size, because her being a teacher here in France, even though she's in an American school here in France, she tends to have way too much in her bag, and she's one of those people who will carry around a computer everywhere she goes, despite having two computers at home and a work computer at work. I don't know, don't ask me, it's a teacher thing, I'm sure. So ultimately it works out perfectly for her, and she's delighted with it. At this point I am now working on the flap and the front closing mechanism. In a previous video, in the Randosero, no idea how to pronounce that. In that video for the Randosero bag, I had tested this out, and I had attached the closing system last to the flap, and that was a mistake, because the stitching marks went through the front of the flap, and I did not want that. Instead, I wanted to attach them to the inside part of the flap, which would then be, of course this is 1.4mm leather, the inside part of the flap, which would then be glued on to the outside part of the flap, which is made out of 2.5mm leather. This will give you a very nice sturdy flap with the closing mechanism firmly in place on the inside of the flap, and yet not visible from the outside of the flap. So yeah, very happy here, because I was able to reuse a technique that I tested out on a previous bag and improve upon it to have more satisfying results. Burnishing all the edges here on the front. I was very careful about the front edges, simply because this is what people would be seeing first. The flap and the detail you give to the flap is going to be hugely essential to the first impression that people have of the bag, so I was very careful of my burnishing here. There is an interesting thing here to note. While burnishing, I was actually using... Yeah, okay, so I have two bottles here. One is EcoFlow Super Sheen, and the other is EcoFlow Gum Trag. Now, Gum Trag is a brilliant burnishing agent. Super Sheen is an interesting product that you would use to put on top of leather to help basically protect it and give it a nice shine. I was not using the Gum Trag to burnish the edges, simply because both bottles look so alike that I'd been using the wrong bottle for the last 2 weeks, as an idiot that I am, and to my frank surprise, after realising my error, it had worked very well. So, there you go. I'm sure that the Super Sheen is not as good as Gum Trag, but there we go. That's the story about it. So here we go, guys. So as usual, I did use my very old and much debated technique of using shoe polish, brown shoe polish, to give this bag a sort of more vintagey, worn look. After applying dollops full or gallons of neatsfoot oil to try and make sure that this bag was as nourished as possible, I went ahead and used, I think I gave it 3 coats of shoe polish, and a lot of people have asked me many times in the comments below, does it come off on clothes? Does it rub off on clothes? Well, no. I mean, if you polish your shoes right, the shoe polish is not going to come off on the bottom of your trousers. So why would it do this here? It's a common error it's a common thing to, you might think that it would indeed come off on your clothes, but the shoe polish, if you apply it properly and then rub off the excess, which is a really important thing, it will not rub off on your clothes, as simple as that. So ultimately, I'm very happy with the way this bag turned out. You can see that front pocket works brilliantly for what it's made for. That strap is very well attached, I'm pleased to say, and it's not budging at all, and it distributes the weight perfectly, and yet the straps can move around perfectly, and I will definitely try this technique out again in the future. The closing mechanism I'm very happy about, although I could have paid a bit more attention to the last 2 steps, which is always where my attention to detail slips. The closing mechanism is not the straightest as it possibly could be, which means that anyone who's a bit anally retentive, or anyone who just likes to see something straight, will be a bit annoyed when they see this bag closed, simply because the flap is not tremendously perfectly straight, but it definitely does the trick, and I'm very happy with that. This is actually a very decent pocket, and I'm glad to say it works wonders for, you know, keys, cell phone, maybe not your credit card because it might be a bit easy to access, but if you don't have the last Samsung or the last iPhone, then it's great, you can use that for your cell phone. This is a comparison. This was the original leather once it was dyed, without the neatsfoot oil, and definitely without the 3 coats of leather polish or shoe polish, and it worked well. So there we go, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do let me know what you think of this bag and this video in the comments below. I'd be delighted to hear your suggestions for future builds. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I'll see you very soon.